What if I told you that this charming German village, located deep in the Chilean countryside, was the site of one of the 20th century's most disturbing human experiments? A place that looked like a fairy tale on the outside, but was a living nightmare on the inside. This is the story of Colonia Dignidad, or Dignity Colony, a name that becomes a sick joke when you learn what really happened there. It's a story of a charismatic Nazi medic who built his own private kingdom, a torture chamber for a brutal dictatorship, and a sanctuary for war criminals. Our story starts with this man, Paul Schäfer, a former Hitler Youth member and Nazi medic who, after the war, became a master of reinvention. He rebranded himself as a preacher, and people were drawn to him. One follower said his charisma was like beams of light, but the cracks showed early. He was accused of molesting boys at an orphanage he ran, and by the late 1950s, German authorities wanted him arrested. So how did a man with this many red flags convince hundreds of people to follow him to the other side of the world? In a post-war Germany filled with uncertainty, he offered purpose and community. He promised them a fresh start, a paradise safe from the evils of the world. In 1961, facing arrest, he fled Germany with his most loyal followers and set up shop in a remote part of Chile. They called it Colonia Dignidad. On the surface, it was a model community. They built a modern hospital, provided free medical care to locals, and lived by the motto, work, pray, heal. But behind the gates, a different reality was taking shape. Followers knew him as Tío Permanente, our eternal uncle. He demanded complete loyalty and maintained total control through a system of surveillance and psychological manipulation that would make authoritarian regimes envious. Daily life in the colony was strictly regimented. Colonists had to confess their perceived sins publicly every day. Private conversations between individuals were completely forbidden. Schäfer taught that two people talking alone invited corruption. The entire 53-square-mile property was surrounded by barbed wire, patrolled by armed guards and attack dogs, and monitored by hidden cameras and microphones. But perhaps most disturbing was how Schäfer systematically destroyed family bonds. Children were separated from their parents at birth and raised communally. They weren't allowed to know who their biological parents or siblings were. All adults were simply aunt or uncle. This created an environment where children had no one to turn to except Schäfer himself. Schäfer's control over the children was absolute, and it was rooted in systematic sexual abuse. He had a group of favored young boys he called his sprinters, who were drugged and brought to his room at night. Horrifically, he taught these children that being chosen by him was a special honor. To understand how deep the psychological control went, consider this. He reportedly staged an execution of Santa Claus in front of the children, all because he couldn't stand the idea of them loving anyone, even a fictional character, more than him. And the abuse wasn't just for children. All colonists were forced to work without pay under the justification that work is divine service. The money generated from their labor didn't benefit the community. Instead, it funded Schäfer's paranoid construction projects, including an extensive network of underground tunnels and bunkers. Punishments for disobedience were severe. Those who questioned Schäfer's authority or attempted to escape faced electric shock treatments, forced ingestion of psychiatric drugs, and other forms of torture. One survivor later reported massive memory loss from repeated electroshock sessions. Escape attempts were rare but not unheard of. The most notable case involved Wolfgang Müller, who tried to flee 3 times. On his third attempt in 1966, he made it to the German embassy in Santiago, but even there, he wasn't safe. Schäfer sent 15 men who forced their way into the embassy to drag him back. Only police intervention allowed Müller to finally escape to Germany, where he went public with his accusations. Yet, little was done to investigate his claims. The colony's isolation and impunity were dramatically strengthened after the 1973 military coup that brought General Augusto Pinochet to power. Schäfer and the Chilean dictator formed what can only be described as a Faustian bargain. Under this arrangement, Colonia Dignidad received remarkable privileges. They could export timber, wheat, and other products while importing whatever they needed, all without paying taxes. Most crucially, the government agreed to ignore reports from escapees about the abuse occurring inside the colony. In return, Colonia Dignidad became a secret prison and torture center for Pinochet's enemies. The colony's underground tunnel systems and soundproof cellars became sites where political dissidents were brought by Pinochet's secret police, known as DINA, or simply DINA. The torture methods employed there were reportedly even more sophisticated than those used by the military regime itself. Schäfer himself was often present during these sessions, instructing DINA agents on how to inflict maximum pain. The abuse involved extensive use of drugs, electroshock, and psychological torment. One harrowing account comes from Luis Peebles, a medical student kidnapped in 1975. He described hours of torture involving electrocution, needles, and electrodes applied to the most sensitive parts of his body. His testimony, years later, would provide crucial evidence of the colony's role in the dictatorship's crimes. Beyond torture, the colony became a site of execution and mass murder. Sources suggest at least 100 people were killed there, with some tortured to death and others shot by Schäfer personally. Bodies were dumped in nearby rivers or buried in mass graves that were later exhumed and destroyed on Pinochet's orders to eliminate evidence. The colony's isolation and protection also made it a sanctuary for Nazi war criminals fleeing justice. Among those who reportedly took refuge there was Joseph Mengele, the notorious Angel of Death from Auschwitz. Other former SS and Gestapo members also found safe haven, and some allegedly shared their expertise in torture with Pinochet's forces. The colony even became involved in chemical weapons production through Project Andrea, DINA's program to manufacture sarin gas, a nerve agent 26 times more lethal than cyanide. This wasn't just torture and murder, it was weapons of mass destruction development on Chilean soil. The case of Boris Weisweiler illustrates the colony's continued danger well into the 1980s. Weisweiler, a 43-year-old Jewish-American mathematics professor, vanished while hiking in Chile in 1984. Declassified documents later revealed he was captured by an army patrol, taken to Colonia Dignidad, and murdered after his captors realized he was Jewish. Chile's return to democracy in 1990 marked the beginning of the end for Colonia Dignidad's impunity. Stripped of protection from the Pinochet regime, Schäfer faced new challenges. Ironically, one of his own policies contributed to his downfall. Because Schäfer had banned sexual relationships within the colony, the population was aging with few new births. His solution was to open a boarding school for local Chilean children, supposedly offering free education. But as soon as these new children arrived, he began abusing the boys, perpetuating the same horrific pattern with a new group of victims. This became the catalyst for his downfall. In 1996, a 12-year-old boy at the school managed to slip a note to his mother that simply read,
"Take me out of here. He hurt me."
With incredible bravery, the mother not only removed her son, but went directly to the chief of Chile's National Detective Force in Santiago, bypassing potentially corrupt local authorities. A warrant was issued for Schäfer's arrest, but the cunning predator retreated into the underground tunnel network he had spent decades building. Detective Luis Enriquez conducted over 30 raids, literally breaking through the colony's gates with armed police, but Schäfer repeatedly evaded capture. The breakthrough came through the persistent work of investigative journalist Carola Fuentes, who had been following the case since 1966. She tracked Schäfer relentlessly for 13 months, using clues from escapees and maintaining surveillance on his associates. Her work revealed frequent trips to Argentina, providing crucial intelligence to authorities. On May 10, 2005, based partly on Fuentes' information, a SWAT team raided a townhouse in Buenos Aires, Argentina. There, hiding in a bedroom, they found 84-year-old Paul Schäfer. He was extradited to Chile and in 2006 convicted of child molestation against 25 children, torture, illegal weapons possession, and murder. The sentence was 20 years in prison plus $1.5 million in damages. However, justice was brief. Schäfer died of heart failure in prison on April 24, 2010, having served only 4 years of his sentence. Today, the site of Colonia Dignidad has been rebranded as a tourist destination called Villa Baviera. You can go there, enjoy German food, and even celebrate Oktoberfest on the same grounds where unspeakable crimes took place. This has, understandably, horrified victims' families who are fighting to have it turned into a proper memorial. And in a perfect, painful metaphor for this struggle, if you go to the official Villa Baviera website, the history section is often listed as under construction. Shockingly, many of Schäfer's high-ranking associates, including his right-hand man and doctor, Hartmut Hopp, fled to Germany. Despite being convicted in Chile, Hopp has avoided extradition and lives freely today, while his victims still carry their scars. In 2019, the German government agreed to pay €10,000 per person to former colony members, accepting moral responsibility but not legal liability. This amount is widely seen as insufficient, especially for child victims who endured the worst suffering. The struggle for genuine reparations and acknowledgement continues. Many survivors and their families continue to fight for justice, proper memorialization, and adequate compensation for decades of abuse. The story of Colonia Dignidad is a brutal lesson in how evil flourishes. It shows what can happen when a charismatic leader preys on vulnerable people, when a community is sealed off from the world, and when a government decides that political convenience is more important than human rights. Thank you so much for joining me on Truly Chilling. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing to my channel. A like on this video also really helps us reach more people. And, as always, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you again for your time and for your support. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.